Lightfoot was invited to the Last Waltz, and when he showed up, Robbie Robertson approached him immediately and said, "Gordon, would you like to perform tonight?" And in the case of Sundown, that was born out of a relationship he had after that marriage broke up with a woman named Kathy Smith.
The infamous Kathy Smith.
The infamous Kathy Smith, and you know, it was a relationship that was passionate and yet fraught with problems. I mean, jealousy, you know, a lot of drinking, and you know, I think Sundown is, you know, it came right out of that cauldron of fiery emotions that he had in his relationship with Kathy Smith. I mean, you know, he loved her deeply, but she drove him wild with jealousy because she was such a beautiful woman and a terrible flirt. And you know, Sundown. It's funny that he should, such a private guy, should be able to write so openly about something as painful as that was for him. And look what it did for him. It took him to, you know, the top of the pop world.
You know what was interesting to read when I was looking at the section on Sundown? There was a company that wanted to license the song, use it in a commercial or something, and he didn't want to. Is that another way of describing his character, about how he protects his songs or his image? Yeah,
well, he's actually... you know, he's a very principled guy. I mean, you know, I'm not putting him on a pedestal because I really, you know, think that what I tried to do with the biography is give a fair and balanced portrait of him, you know, and show some of the darker side and the warts, if you like, in the man. And you know, he's very principled, and you know, he's sometimes done things that haven't really been in his best interest. He had an opportunity in the 70s to sign up with one of the biggest entertainment managers, you know, power brokers in the United States, and he turned that down because he said, you know, it wasn't him. It didn't feel natural. It didn't feel real to him. And
yeah, you know, in the book you talk about how he had committed to it, but then he realized it was a mistake, and he went down personally to back out of the deal.
Yeah, no, I mean it's extraordinary that when I heard Lenny Waronker was his producer at Warner Brothers for all of the biggest albums, you know, beginning with If You Could Read My Mind, and all the way through the 70s and into the 80s. And Lenny Waronker told me the story. It's quite remarkable about being witness to that meeting that Lightfoot had, and I'm sorry, I'm drawing a blank on the name of the manager.
Was it Weintraub?
That's absolutely right. It was Jerry Weintraub, and Weintraub, like I say, he made John Denver and Kenny Rogers superstars. And he was involved with Colonel Tom Parker and Elvis Presley, and he was involved with Frank Sinatra as an agent. And you know, so this guy was a big deal, Jerry Weintraub. And you're right. I mean, what I say in the book is that Lightfoot did agree to a management deal with Weintraub, and then he flew back to Toronto and almost immediately regretted having signed the deal. And so instead of having his lawyer, for instance, call and tell Weintraub, you know, he'd like out of the deal, he got on a plane and flew back down to face Jerry Weintraub in person. And Lenny Waronker was in the room in Weintraub's office with Lightfoot, and Waronker told me the story of how Lightfoot was sitting there just in such agony at having to basically go back on his word. Because, you know, again, this speaks to Lightfoot's character. He's a man of his word. He's very principled, and you know, he said to Weintraub, "Jerry, I can't go through with it." And Waronker told me that Weintraub suddenly went into his sales pitch and really tried to sort of keep Lightfoot on the hook. and Gordon Lightfoot's looking down at the carpet or at his feet, and then suddenly he looks up at Jerry Weintraub and says, "Jerry, I can't stand the hype." It's a remarkable moment, I think, that, and in Lightfoot's story, that he passed up this opportunity to be managed by someone who could take him into the stratosphere, in the entertainment world. Movie deals, television specials, but Lightfoot it wasn't who he was. It wasn't what he was comfortable doing, and so he turned it down. And I think it speaks volumes about just what kind of character Gordon Lightfoot is.
Yeah, I think it does, and it makes me think if he had gone the other way, which I understand he couldn't, I mean, he would have been at the status that I think he deserves. There are other stars who are bigger or more noted, but not as accomplished. Not to say that they're not good, but you look at what Gordon Lightfoot's body of work, but he's had that feeling. I thought that was a perfect quote. I don't like the hype.
And it's just who he is. He's very much a man of his word, and he does things instinctively, and if it doesn't feel right, he just won't do it. And yeah, I agree with you that he in terms of his body of work, I mean, he's written over 400 songs, and there's got to be at least 25, maybe 30 that are classics that will outlive him and, will be just timeless songs. And, he doesn't really toot his own horn. And I guess that's very Canadian as well.
Going back to Ronnie Hawkins and the Hawks. Now, as you said, the Hawks later formed the band. What I didn't realize was that Gordon was at that concert and Robbie Robertson had actually asked him kind of at the last minute to perform.
Yes, I mean, Lightfoot was invited to the Last Waltz, and when he showed up, Robbie Robertson approached him immediately and said, "Gordon, would you like to perform tonight?" And Lightfoot said, "Well, Robbie, I'm not prepared. I didn't come with my guitar. I've got to be at my table with my fellow guests." And he basically turned down the opportunity to perform at the Last Waltz. And his compatriots, Joni Mitchell and the band and Neil Young were up there, and he could have again, sort of been in the spotlight and reaped the rewards of that attention. But he's a man who he's a couple of things that I think people should know. He's a perfectionist, and he's also a man who's most comfortable with being in. He likes to be in his comfort zone. And if he gets thrown a curveball or something at the last minute, it generally throws him off. He's kind of a very organized guy who likes things to play out in almost like a routine that he knows and expects. So Robbie Robertson, to ask him sort of on the spot like that, if he'd like to get up and perform, it was just he couldn't cope with that. I mean, there's a couple of other stories that I think speak to his character. He was nominated for a Grammy Award for, he was nominated a couple of times for Grammy Awards, but when he was nominated for If You Could Read My Mind, sorry, let me take that back. I think this is actually about the Edmund Fitzgerald, because the Edmund Fitzgerald is a long song. And so it was at the Grammy Awards where he was nominated for the Edmund Fitzgerald, and they wanted to know if he would perform a shortened version of the song, and he said no. And it kind of speaks to who he is. I mean, there was no way he could see performing a shortened version of his song, even though it would be before a massive television audience. So that's another sign of just who he is and how he goes about things. He does things his own way.
There was another thing that talked about his character. He was going to launch, or maybe he did launch, a lawsuit against Michael Masser, who had written the music for the song "The Greatest Love of All," which
that's right.
Whitney Houston.
Yeah, and Gordon Lightfoot was in his health club doing his daily workout, which he's been doing for a couple of decades now. And he overheard on the Health Club sound system Michael Masters' "The Greatest Love of All," sung by Whitney Houston. And he, you know, I mean, he has an amazing gift for melody, and I think he has something close to perfect pitch. He immediately recognized a similarity in the melody to "If You Could Read My Mind," between "If You Could Read My Mind" and "The Greatest Love of All." And so he thought, well, I don't want people to think that, that I took my melody from this song. I mean, it's just not right. So he contacted Michael Master, and I think he had initiated legal action. And in the end, he basically decided not to pursue a lawsuit because he found out that Whitney Houston was going to be performing at the Grammys, and he didn't want this to basically upset her at that point in her career, because it was her recording of the song, and so he decided he wouldn't go through with the lawsuit just to spare Whitney Houston any grief, and I thought that was very, very remarkable too.
When he recorded the album, which is one of my favorites, by the way, East of Midnight,
yes.
And the title song, not the title song, but the single, Anything for Love, had been done with David Foster.
Yes.
And it looked like David Foster was getting more credit for the album than he probably deserved. And you talk in the book about how Gordon didn't publicly talk about it, but it disturbed him a little.
Yeah, well, I think he, he'd been asked by Warner Brothers to work with David Foster on one track for the album, and as you say, Foster produced Anything for Love, but Lightfoot himself worked on the entire rest of the album, produced the rest of the album himself, and put huge amounts of hours into it. I mean, I think he told me he wrote something like 50 songs for consideration for East of Midnight, and he spent countless hours deciding on which songs to use, and then recording and re-recording, being the perfectionist that he is. And when the album came out, all the press seemed to be about David Foster. And, I think it stuck in Lightfoot's craw a bit that his own, Lightfoot's own production contribution which was for the all but one song, was being overlooked. So I think that did bother him, but in a sort of a charming way, he started making a joke of it later on in concerts. Whenever he would perform Anything for Love, he'd say, "Well, this is Dave's ditty," he would say before performing.
I think that song, though, did help him. The work with Foster certainly gave him more attention, and that's probably why Warner Brothers wanted him to work with Foster. Well,
on that same project, Warner Brothers asked Lightfoot if he'd like to record a duet with Bob Dylan for the album. And like I said, Lightfoot and Dylan, went back a long ways. They went back all the way to the mid '60s when they were both managed by Albert Grossman. And Lightfoot could have picked up the phone and called Dylan and said, "How would you like to do a song together for my next album?" But he couldn't bring himself to ask Dylan. He didn't want to put Dylan in an uncomfortable position, so he didn't ask. So,
wow.
I mean, that's, again, he sort of shoots himself in the foot sometimes, but he can't be anything but who he is. And in that instance, he didn't want to put pressure on someone he regards as a mentor and a friend.
That's the interesting about reading your book. You read it and you think, "Oh my God, what could have been? Oh, that would have been great." But by the time you really get into the book, you kind of understand why he didn't do certain things. You still wish it would have happened, but you kind of understand why it didn't.
Yeah, and and I said, I really think, Robert, that in many ways, even though he's shied away from certain opportunities that would have made him a bigger star, I think has endeared him even more deeply with his legions of fans. As I said before, there's not really a phony bone in his body.